Okay, so my name is Anna Jacobs, and I work for the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative. This event is a collaboration among Duke I&E, the Career Center, the Fuqua School of Business, and the Pratt School of Engineering. So thank you all for joining us. I also I'm going to just introduce Matt Alston, who's going to be our moderator this evening. Matt, you might already many of you probably know him. He graduated from Duke in 2017 with a degree in computer science and the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Certificate before he joined Uber as a product manager. He is currently founding a company at the intersection of social events and community. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Matt to introduce or to go through introductions with our panelists.
Cool, thanks, Anna. So as Anna mentioned, I graduated 2017, studied CS, and I'm currently in the Bay Area. I've a few years out of Duke, but have spent some time working as a product manager and am now currently founding my own company. So would love to just take a second and allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves. We'll try to keep it relatively brief, but for each of you, would love to know maybe when you graduated from Duke and what you studied, sort of the brief overview of the career arc since then and what you're working on now. Ryan, do you want to maybe start us off?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Carey. I actually didn't go to Duke. I went to Loyola in Baltimore, but I'm here in Durham and I'm kind of part of the Duke world in many different ways. I run a company called Better On that focuses on helping people, leaders, and teams get better with their presence for the stage or camera or video. And my life around video started working at YouTube many moons ago, and I was a junior account manager in the sales world looking for something different, and I stumbled upon YouTube, and you guys probably know the rest of the story. So sort of just saw a need for people to be more human when it comes to being on camera, and I've sort of followed that passion for about 8 to 10 years now. And as luck would have it, COVID has forced most businesses and everybody around it to feel the pain of what it takes to really come through the camera. So we're building a product to help automate it and make it easier. But yeah, all about video.
Very cool. Helena, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Matt. I'm excited to be here. So I went to Duke, but I didn't graduate. So I think that's 0 for 2 in terms of when did we graduate from Duke. I came into Duke having already kind of been in the entrepreneurial space, started things in high school, and knowing how to code. So most of my time at Duke was really just exploring different passions, specifically like global health and I&E as well. So I was on track to be doing I&E when then I decided halfway through my sophomore year to take a semester off, moved out to Mountain View, California, and joined a Series A startup. And they were in the connected vehicle space. So I was there for a semester and then decided, hey, I'm gonna continue this and decided to leave Duke, join them full time. And then about 9 months into that, decided, hey, I'm actually not crazy passionate about cars. They're cool, and it's cool that they can drive themselves. But my real passions were really in healthcare, mental health, and positive human connections. And I visited Duke for a weekend, and next thing you know, I'm convincing my friend Brian to drop out with me, apply to Y Combinator, which is an incubator in the Bay Area, dragged him out to San Francisco, and then kind of have been iterating in this community/connected space for a while. And for the past, since March, we've been working on Glimpse, which is this round robin speed matching platform. And kind of like what you were saying, Ryan, we care a lot about how do we make video chat feel more personal? How do we help it actually connect people and not feel like a tool? So that's kind of where we're at now.
Awesome, cool. Alcide, you want to go next? Are you there? Milagros, you want to go while...
No, I was actually just practicing. Oh. I wanted to see how my lips looked. My name's Alcide Honore. I'm Trinity class of 2000. I'm an attorney by trade. Actually majored in political science, did a master's degree in political science, and got a law degree down here in Georgia State in Atlanta. Been living in Atlanta for about 20 years. And I would say in 2017, during a conversation with my younger brother, who's a software engineer, who was consulting for one of the 200 legal practice management software programs. And he was trying to get me to switch from what I was using to try out the product he was consulting for. And I just had a heart-to-heart with him. I told him I'm not switching. I hate the one that I use. I had it for 6 years, been paying for it every month, and just started using it a couple of years ago. However, what I could use is a mobile solution to help me track all of my calls with clients while I'm running all over the world and taking calls on my mobile phone. So that's how we came up with the idea for Bullseye, which is our application. We basically just added a third button to the call screen. We think it's pretty cool. And in the past year, we came in first place in American Bar Association Startup Alley at the ABA Tech Show. So first place out of about 100 companies. And we recently just completed the Google for Startups Atlanta Founders Academy. And, we're still bootstrapping this thing, haven't taken on any outside capital. We just crossed the threshold of about 10,000 downloads, I don't know, sometime last week or the week before, in about the past 3 months when we launched our production version. So we've got a desktop version, we've got a Android version that's already in the App Store, and a desktop version and iOS version that are still being developed. And that's where we're at.
That's awesome. And congrats on the growth. That's super impressive. Milagros, do you want to round it out?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Milagros Brown. I'm Trinity class of 2001. I live in Silver Spring, which is just outside of the Washington, D.C. area. For those of you who aren't familiar, I think I'm a little bit non-traditional, perhaps, to this group in that my business that I'm working on is not actually tech-based, but a social impact startup. So following graduation, I worked in politics for over a decade. I started doing get out the vote work and then followed that with high donor and major donor fundraising. So I worked on a number of campaigns, various committees, and then for a number of nonprofits as well. So with all of the events of last year, I started a handle called After November. It was really more of a personal project where I was hoping to share some of my own experiences and my political insight to just participate in the conversation that so many of us were having. And I was really pleased with the response, and former colleagues in the political space were also really interested in the work. So now I'm happy to be an early stage startup in really developing sort of what the bigger business will be in the social impact area.
Awesome. Cool. So before we jump into some questions, just wanted to make a quick note. If you have any questions, there'll be 10, 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. And so feel free to just drop them in the chat, and Anna will help us collect and wrangle them for the Q&A portion at the back end. Cool. And then for each of these questions, some of them I'll direct them to all four panelists. Others, I'll try to sort of like target them based on what's most relevant and to allow for more questions. Cool, but I'll start with one which is for all of the panelists, which is, what did you do in college that directly paired you for the work that you're doing now? I think it'll be interesting because, we have some who didn't finish college and others who have, decades of work experience. And so I'm curious to see and hear kind of for each of you how that translated into the work you're doing today. Maybe we'll go reverse order. Milagros, you want to start it off?
Sure, I'm happy to. So in terms of what I did in college, I kind of thought about this question prior to the panel. And I would say my most honest answer is that I made a lot of mistakes. So I took classes that I did not succeed in. I, socialized in ways that perhaps were unsuccessful as well. I did a lot of things that really just tested my understanding of who I was and who I wanted to be. So I think just the mistakes that I made in college were probably more valuable than the classes that I really succeeded at. And I think it really helped to illuminate what my next steps would be. And, I'm still working in the political space. It was my first job out of college. I'm still kind of working in the social justice area. So I think just discovering my own voice in that in college through a lot of trial and error was perhaps the most valuable thing. On the technical side, I did do a lot of political work through internships and making relationships and connections, which have helped facilitate me my entire career. So in terms of a technical, work that I did prior, I was already kind of in this doing the work prior to graduating.
Cool. Alcide?
Well, starting off with undergrad, I think the first thing I did was form some really deep personal relationships. Probably could have worked on widening that range of relationships. And however, I still maintain some very close friendships today, with some folks that I actually graduated with. And, so I've got a group of people that I really trust, exposing, my wildest, zaniest ideas to. And, they aren't afraid to tell me, hey, look, that idea is really stupid. That'll never work. I'd say in addition to that, I think I came to realize as a liberal arts major that what my colleagues in the engineering school and that were pre-med, like what they were doing, that was something very different. And despite how, smart I may think I was, what I was good at was not what they were good at. And I took a computer science class. It was like an intro level class. The professor explained to us that this is not a class that you take if you're interested in having a career in working with computers. And he also said that while you may be some of the smartest students in the world, you're not necessarily amongst the smartest people in the world. All things that, kind of play back in my head from time to time. So I think I, kind of walked away with the realization that to be successful, in this venture and most others, I need to operate in a team, sort of, from a team perspective, and really be willing to step back and let folks that have a particular set of expertise do their thing, and not be intimidated, by having folks involved that know how to do things that I don't know how to do.
Cool. Yeah, that definitely resonates. Helena, anything to add?
I mean, I think both of you kind of nailed it. Like kind of similar to Milagros, like I learned what didn't work for me. I made a lot of mistakes. I think one of the biggest ones was like, I thought BME would be the perfect fit for me. And then I started in BME and Pratt, and I realized, hey, actually, this moves a lot slower than tech. And it's not that like quick feedback loop that I was used to. So I realized I was able to explore that and kind of cross that off. It's like, I'm not going to be doing this. And kind of did that with a couple other things. I think another thing that I really was intentional about doing is like building things all the time. So I spent probably every other weekend going to hackathons across the country. And it's great as a student because they'll literally fly you out. So I was traveling across the country, competing in hackathons, meeting cool people, building cool things. I also learned that classes probably didn't matter as much as I thought they did in the time. So I think that's more like reflecting back on my time, that I still spend a lot of time doing like classwork and stuff. But I think majority of it was like, can I maximize how much I'm building? Can I maximize how deep my relationships are? And can I meet cool people and have amazing like conversations that last until late in the morning? I think that was pretty much it.
Cool. Yeah. And Ryan, what about you from Loyola?
Just touching on what Helena said, it's funny. I didn't learn this till way after college, but learning that what you don't want is oftentimes more important than what you actually do. And for me, I think, I wasn't the best student. I wasn't the most serious student, but I think that what I always really focused on was just the people and learning as much as I can about as many people as I can. Whoever I come across, and going to find new people. And it was one of these things where I just had like a feeling about it. I wasn't told to go do it. I just felt drawn and curious. But I think, I was thinking about this question too, coming into this, and there's a bit of irony for me in where I am now. I majored in PR and communications, sort of just because, I was like, I like communicating. I know how to communicate, and never really thought I would pursue any sort of career in it, and just went down a different windy path. And then kind of, here I am working on a company that's focused on communications with people. So it's just funny where things take you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. So shifting gears a little bit. So, everyone here is going to be going through the recruiting process soon. Many of which will be looking at startups. And so for those of you who have hired recently, and particularly hired during the pandemic, where it was probably remote, is there anything that anything you wish applicants would do differently to make the selection process easier on your end, or even more generally, just any advice for remote applicants and going through the recruiting process, sort of in today's environment? This one is really open to whoever has hired recently and has something to say.
I can kick us off. I think something that is really hard to assess, whether it's online or in-person interviews, so this kind of applies across the board, is the ability for somebody to execute. So this kind of is both in like business roles and growth roles, but then also in engineering roles. So we've tried everything from setting take-home challenges to other things, but the people that really stand out are people who take what we give them as a challenge and do like 10x of that, and show us that, hey, not only can I do what's asked of me, like I go that extra step. And I think in our position, we're a 4-person team, we're a young startup. We need people who will just take initiative and just do things. And if you can showcase that you're a doer, that you're an executor, you're going to be miles ahead of anybody else that's applying. So for us, I think that's the one thing that we're looking for above all else, in addition to things like, a fit in terms of culture and stuff like that, which is also hard to assess online. We want to hire people based on their full person. And it's incredibly hard to understand them as people when you meet them, even in a dozen Zoom calls. So ability to execute, and if you can bring some of your personality to these Zoom calls somehow, I think those two things.
Yeah, and when it comes to the ability to execute, are you relying more heavily on what they do throughout the interview process with you, or on their resume and what they've sort of demonstrated in the past, that they can execute on, and the side projects, all of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, great question. I mean, side projects are insanely helpful. It depends on the experience level that we're recruiting from. So if we're hiring a new grad, the projects that they can showcase just look extremely different than if they are coming from a larger company, and we can see, oh wow, I implemented this system. Can you walk me through that? And understanding whether or not they can explain what they implemented, and that's already a red flag. If you can't walk through some of your projects in technical detail, then I have doubts. But again, when talking to college students and new grads in particular, it's a lot more about what can you show us kind of on the spot in your application, because you just don't have as much experience or things to show for. If you do, that's amazing. That's also putting you above everybody else. And track record of being able to execute. I mean, yeah, that is a way of showing that you're an executor, right? It's just showing, in this situation, XYZ happened and I did Y.
Cool. Yeah, very helpful. Anyone else have something to add there?
Hey, how you doing? I actually have scaled up my entire team virtually during COVID. It's been actually a pretty remarkable time because I've been kind of dragged out of the daily grind of, practicing law, which I still have to do to some extent because we're bootstrapping this thing. And it's been really remarkable to go from working in a very traditional environment with the whole office and, the landline desk phones and, that the whole deal, to now being, almost, well, being exclusively virtual with respect to what I'm doing with Bullseye. I've even, changed, my physical office arrangement to, now moving into more of a, sort of shared space type of an environment. I would say that we have somehow developed a remarkable culture, despite the fact that everyone came in virtually. I think part of it has to do with the fact that everyone really understood our product and, what the product was all about, what we we're trying to do and where we're trying to go. And so I think that, is first and foremost. I would say one sort of hiccup we ran into in the hiring process was, actually an applicant that actually had, some undergraduate background in software, went to law school, graduated, decided he wanted to pivot to, going into a development role. And so I thought to myself, hey, look, this is the perfect person. It didn't work out. We made the decision, we made the realization pretty quickly that it didn't. And, and we moved on. I think the experience that he was looking for was something different. And I've had this conversation with, some of our employees right now. We've got two that are our designer and one of our engineers that are both getting ready to graduate. They're about to complete their graduate programs, and they can go and get a job at a Google or Apple, Microsoft, whatever the case may be. But they believe so much in what we're doing, and they've had the opportunity to really get their hands dirty working on some important software developments for our company. And they've really sort of established through that a sort of a meaningful connection, not only to the company interpersonally, but also with respect to their work. And that's something that they'll be able to carry along with them for the rest of their career. So I think that, maybe for you all, there may be a few things that you should really be taking into really heavy consideration. I think for one is just pay, right? You're not going to make as much working with a, pre-rev bootstrap startup as you are going to make elsewhere. I think number two is, your resume. Are you able to make a contribution to this company in such a way that you're developing experience and, a takeaway that is specific enough for you to really be able to use it to kick ass in any sort of future interviews or job scenarios you get into. And then for three, just really believing in, what it is the company is doing. Quite frankly, take it for what it's worth. You don't have to believe in what Google is doing. You just watch the direct deposit hit your bank account every other week and enjoy living in your very nice Bay Area apartment. And, and that's fine. Or maybe you have a tremendous amount of debt that you need to pay, or some other realities with respect to your family life. And so I just recommend not putting yourself in a set of circumstances where it's going to be, difficult for you to, to kind of manage through those very important, very human types of needs. But if you can make it work, I think it's just a remarkable opportunity, to really get a level of experience that you otherwise not be able to, and to walk away with a sense of accomplishment and the ability to point directly, hey, look, I was the head developer for this application that's in a Play Store that's managed to rack up 10,000 downloads in a 3-month time period. That's something that gets you pretty far, I would think, in an interview or as a resume builder, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. Anything to add, Milagros or Ryan?
No, I thought Alcide and Helena did a great job, so I don't have anything in this one.
Cool.
One thing I would add, just coming from, that we are all doing this remotely, and when you are looking for a job, you're trying to impact or influence whoever it is representing the company. So I just think, trying to get a hold on your passion, be passionate about something, even if it's not, everything about the company or the opportunity. It's just, if you can harness that and bring it through this sort of environment, you'll leave a lasting impact. And a lot of times, we are all more than what our resumes say. So it's just, obviously have your accomplishments and have your talking points there. But before you show up, just think a little bit, go the extra mile about how you are going to show up to leave that lasting impact.
Yeah, actually, just to play off some of these answers a bit, and going a little off script, I'm curious, do any of you have advice for tactically how candidates should understand what the opportunities are at super early stage startups and sort of even get their foot in the door? Because I've had experience recruiting at big companies where all the job listings are on the website. There's an application process. There's a formal recruiting. Here's the step by step. And I just know from being at early stage startup and knowing other founders, oftentimes what they're recruiting for isn't even established and public online. They sort of realize they need a new role and they go work through their networks to find good candidates, but they're not necessarily publishing a job listing. And so I'm curious, do you all have thoughts on how candidates can sort of get their foot in the door, get in front of you, and even kick off the process of how to recruit?
So I'll just say something quickly on this. I'm sure the rest of the panelists have some more thoughtful input. But I think that to that question, tenacity, which is probably something that most of the people who are on this call have, just from the fact that you're participating in it. But just if something appeals to you, being someone who now has a small itty bitty startup and who's also worked at startups, as you mentioned, there needs to be a great amount of flexibility and curiosity and true passion in just even participating in the process. So, if there is a company that's appealing to you, but is in just really baby stages or middle of whatever, finding out who those point of contacts are and just showing some tenacity from the beginning, even if there's not even a job posted or there doesn't seem to be opportunities, just expressing curiosity in the company to begin with goes a long way in showing that you're going to take that proactively once you're actually working in the space, which is appealing to anyone who's running a startup because you're reinventing the wheel so many times in the process that you want to have someone participating in it who's taking on a certain level of partnership in growing the idea. So kind of seeing that someone's really involved and taking on that own entrepreneurial spirit in participating in the startup process from the get-go. And then never underestimating the growth potential of where you're going to work. Just because some place is very small doesn't mean that there aren't, very scalable opportunities there. So yeah, just commitment, tenacity, curiosity, those things.
Awesome. Anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, a little bit. So I think that was super well said. I think I would say go a step beyond that. So some of my favorite applicants have not only emailed me oh, I know you don't have a job listed for this, but just so you know, I'm interested. I love the mission, all this thing. So they show passion, they follow up, all the right things. But then a step beyond that would be, hey, here's screenshots of your website. Move this button here, change these designs here. This is why I think you should do this. I'm not looking for anything in return, but try these things. Let me know if they work. I'm just here to learn, right? So the difference in the two is one, is showing that you're passionate and it's doing all the right things. And the second one is you're providing value, and now I know that you're an executor. I know that without me even asking for you to do something, you can do it. And kind of you're saying that, I don't know I need the role until I need it. And it's just super fast moving pace where 3 weeks ago, we were we need a designer now. And that's not how you want to build your recruitment funnel. But that's how it is right now for us because everything's just kind of a whirlwind. So it ends up being sourced through your network unless somebody has done that before where they're kind of ripping apart your design and saying, I recommend these things. And I think we're lucky in this because we're a consumer facing startup. And people are using us all the time. So we try to recruit from people who've already used and loved our product. So that strategy won't work for everybody, but.
Yeah, honestly, just to echo, I think anecdotally, like I've been on both sides of, loving somebody's product and sending them an email with my thoughts and like, hey, have you thought about this, this, and this? Because I think these could be interesting. And like, I bring a unique perspective because I worked on gamification at Uber, and here's how you could think about this. And we sort of brought on someone to help contribute just as an intern recently because they did the same to me, and they sort of like, I love your space, I see what you're doing, I have some thoughts, and they sort of, without asking anything in return, they just sent me all of their thoughts. They kept in touch, they followed up a couple months later, and we realized we needed someone, and they were the first person to sort of get the email. So definitely would echo that. I think that's a really strong way to go, especially if you do really care about their space, you are really passionate about what they're doing. Establish yourself before they need the role, because then you'll be the first person they reach out to. Okay, so I'm gonna shift gears again. Ryan, this one's for you. As you've spent both time at sort of the quintessential big tech company, Google, and now are at a startup. I'm curious, what is different about what a startup is looking for from what like an employer like Google is looking for? Or like, how would you sort of categorize the differences between sort of what skills startups are recruiting for versus big tech, such as Google? And anyone feel free to contribute to this answer as well. I just know Ryan has very apt experience here.
I mean, it sort of plays off what we were just talking about, that you don't, until you're in the startup world and beyond the bigger tech world, you don't exactly know, not even just the kind of skills you're looking for, but just like the kind of person with the skills you are looking for. So yeah, I think it's one of those situations that the younger a company is, the earlier a company is, almost like the more human and agile the skills need to be. I mean, there's still the standard box of skills depending on what your role is going to be. But I just think that the earlier stage company you get involved with, those are going to be a lot more raw. Whereas with the bigger companies, it's a little bit more check the box, prove it you can do it, we'll hire you, you can prove that you can do it here. Whereas there's just a lot more flexibility when it comes to a smaller, we need you to do this today, that tomorrow, and someone's like, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Okay, cool. So the next set of questions is going to be a little different depending on exactly what your experience is, but it's around the idea of like the risk of leaving a big company to join or start your own thing. Helena, for you dropped out of school to start a company or to work at a company and then start a company. And obviously a lot of people would see that as really risky. But all of you to some extent have left big, cushy, safe opportunities in order to do something that is risky, or at least, from the outside view, seems very risky. And so curious for each of you, what really was the motivating factor that sort of made that risk something that you were comfortable with? And how did you just think about sort of trading off the security of big job or school for starting a company? We can do round robin here. I'll see. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I started off by engaging and learning. I mean, doing whatever sort of, I guess, process or set of procedures that are laid out by the sort of, standard startup ecosystem. And, look, your idea is new, right? But you're not the first person to want to be want to either work in a startup or, form a company out of nowhere. So in Atlanta specifically, there's this Atlanta Technology Development Center. They had, for a membership fee of like $25 a quarter, I could really go in there and get a startup education, right? Where they go through validating your idea, getting a sense of financial modeling and what sort of investments that it's going to take, and really just learning what it's going to take to actually have a successful product, determining whether or not through the scientific steps that are actually, published and available to learn or to know, do I actually have a solution to a problem or a solution that's looking for a problem, right? I mean, and it matters. And I could go through, a list of different, text and other things that you can, read and so forth. And it's just remarkable how different the approach to, building a startup company is to, building a traditional company. And whatever you can do, to learn more about that and really validate your idea. I think it de-risks the idea of jumping into a startup quite a bit. So, I don't know if it's going to work. I do pretty well as a lawyer. I'll probably have my first year where my revenue is either flat or a little bit down. But to me, it's definitely worth it.
Awesome. Milagros, what about you?
Sure. I feel like the answer to this question is completely contingent on so many different factors: where you are in your life, your risk tolerance in general, and how honest you're being with yourself in terms of the commitment that you have to even pursuing the project, and whether or not the project is something that's truly aligned, that if you don't find success when you anticipate success, that you're willing to stay the course and see it through whatever the finish line you define for yourself to be. So, for me, in terms of risk tolerance, I have a high risk tolerance when it comes to professional endeavors. I think part of that was just my career in politics is very entrepreneurial in a way. You're constantly going from one campaign to another because it's a short-term project. You don't join a campaign and anticipate being there for 20 years. You join it for a couple of months and then you move on to the next thing. So I think that was sort of normalized for me to kind of like jump into something new and exciting and mission driven. But, I also, the reality is this may not be the same narrative for everyone on this call. It seems like kind of a diversity of backgrounds, but I'm in my 40s. I have a daughter. I'm expecting, another child this summer. So the timing, isn't necessarily ideal, but on the other hand, when is timing ideal? So, I am being honest with myself, feeling like this is the right time to take this step. And we're also financially in a place where that feels like a comfortable risk for our family. And when I was younger, I could take financial risks because, I didn't have as many people responsible for the financial outcomes that would occur. So, yeah, I think just a degree, maybe this isn't the most Duke answer, but just a degree of honesty with yourself about, really assessing the landscape, really assessing, am I willing to leave this job? What are the true consequences after the adrenaline has left, after you've made the leap and now you're actually doing the work and you may not have the outcomes that you anticipate? Will you have, do you have the support infrastructure in place to be able to stay the course? Do you have the mentors? Do you have the plan? Do you have the ability to adapt the plan? Do you have the financial resources? So a series of questions that, I think are important to ask yourself prior to making the switch.
Yeah, definitely. Ryan, anything else to add there?
Yeah, this is all very, very in line. It's a very, individual decision. It's all about timing. It's all about your relationship to risk. Back to what Alcide said a couple questions ago, just about, having that cushy gig in that nice place in San Francisco. I think for me personally, like I was living an incredible opportunity, and I looked around at a lot of my peers and looked at the path they were on, and I didn't get a lot of happiness out of them. And I just kind of was at a point in my life, this was like 10 years ago, where I was just like, I would like to have a good shot at being happy with what I'm doing. And I didn't know exactly what that was going to be, but it was just kind of like this moment of, I guess, having it come down to believe that I was going to be okay, whatever that meant. And, just being like, this is going to make a good story no matter how it ends. So just sort of like, trusting that moment and, going for it.
Definitely. Helena, anything about the decision to drop out of school and go at your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think I get the question about like, taking the leap and like dropping out of school a lot, and kind of equating that with risk. But I think in my situation, and kind of like everyone's been echoing this with like, it's very personal, and it may or may not actually be a risk. Like with Duke, you can take a leave of absence, then you can come back. Whoop-de-doo, like what's the risk there actually? Same thing with like, deciding to do that for a year, right? You can still come back. And Duke has actually recently changed their policy on that as well, which I really admire. So for me, there were a lot of ways that I worked to de-risk it, which like if you're considering doing something and you're hesitant, actually, so a little tangent, but last week I was on a call with Howie Ree from Duke, and he at the end of his little session asked everybody to make like a fears list. So a lot of people make like goals lists, but he was like, take 2 minutes, write down everything you're scared of about the next year. This can be personal, it can be professional, and I encourage everybody to do this after the call even. And write them all down. And you'll notice that a lot of them are just like pent up in your head of like, hey, I'm worried I can't get a job after if I decide to maybe take an internship at a startup instead of like FANG, right? Or maybe if I do a startup, then I'm unemployable later. Or what other things? Like being financially stable. Like there's a lot of things that might be in your head, and like write them all down and then actually look at the probability that these happen. For my sake, like in my case, like I got a job at a startup. I was making 6 figures and I had proved to myself that, hey, I'm employable, and now when I go and take a leap, build a startup, maybe I spend 2 years on it. I'm confident that I can still go get a job somewhere. Right. And to kind of Milagros' point, I am young. No one's dependent on me. I can take financial risks as long as, I have food and like a place to live in. So if there was a perfect time, I would actually say that now is that for me. And I'm glad I took the risk, and I'm glad that I've had enough mentorship and support along the way. And I'm also glad that, I was fortunate enough early on to like learn to code, right? So there's a lot of ways to de-risk it. And some of those are technical skills. And some of those are like network, you want to have a network that you can lean on. Yeah, I think those are the two things, like having technical skills to fall back on and a network to fall back on. Once you have those two, you can pretty much do anything.
Awesome. Yeah. And I tend to agree that it's really impressive to be willing to go and try and build something from nothing. And I think a lot of employers look at that and they see that as a very, very, strong signal about what you're going to be like as an employee. So I do think that employers oftentimes will look fondly upon trying to start something, even if that thing isn't successful, which I think, somewhat de-risks the journey. Cool. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about starting companies, about recruiting at startups. I want to talk a little bit about working at startups. So I am curious from any of you, some of you I think have actually worked at startups, others are employing early stage employees. And so what is it like to work at a startup versus working at a larger company? And what do you think like an employee is going to get out of that experience that's different and maybe unique from going and joining sort of a more established, larger company? Open-ended, anyone can answer. If somebody wants to jump in, then they can just get started.
I'll jump in on that one right quick. We are focused on results, not on FaceTime. I mean, we do have a daily stand-up. It'll last anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour and a half. From time to time, we'll do hackathons, depending upon where we're at. I think one of the things that we do differently is we may invest a significant amount of resources in going in a particular direction. And, we may say, hey, look, I'm glad we did that because we learned a lot from it, but we're going to stop going that way and we're going to go in a completely different direction altogether. I don't know that large companies have the ability to stop and pivot on a dime like that. And it's one of the things that, I really love about being in a startup environment. And I also, really enjoy about being in a position where, I can make those kinds of decisions without getting yelled at by some, by some person. I think that that culture becomes a lot more important in startups, because I think that you're working on very specific sorts of goals. At least that's, been the case in the context of what we're doing. And and it's very visible, right? And if you're not getting the job done, there's nowhere to hide. So if if you need to reach out for help, or you need to be able to be honest with your teammates about where you're running into roadblocks or whatever the case may be. It just, to me, becomes a lot more important than maybe like you're probably not going to spend your day finding the end of the internet working at a startup.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely would agree there. Anything to add from any of the other panelists?
Yeah, I would just say that, I think that, you're going to find culture anywhere, but the culture and the energy you get from a startup is not going to necessarily be comparable to that of a bigger organization. And I also think that, most of the time there aren't enough bodies to do all the work, and there's not enough time to do all the work. So there's a huge opportunity to wear many hats and be many things and try many things and learn what you may not have thought you were capable of or good at, and have it open up new doors for just your own individual growth. Obviously a lot, pressure comes with that. Like Alcide said, like there's nowhere to hide. So, but if you are cool with that, then it is a world of opportunity to kind of just see, how much bigger than yourself that you think you are, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would, maybe it's a little bit tangential to the question itself, but even kind of connecting to the last question. And I know that the nature of this panel is really on in advance of the networking fair that's coming up. So, folks are looking for tips on job hunting, but in some extent, it's also like comparing the corporate infrastructure to startups. I found, having worked in kind of both, that really the lens that I went into it, once I was doing the work, I was able to identify opportunities and gaps often that maybe weren't being addressed by the company or not being addressed by the larger infrastructure. And so a lot of my experience in the political sense, but also having worked in startup space as well, I'm trying to use what I learned in terms of failure to address needs and ways in which, communicating to the public, because I'm in the social impact space, but sort of gaps that I saw when I was working in both entities have really informed the work that I'm doing now. So it's really narrowed the thought process in terms of if I'm solving for a problem, it helped really curate what those problems were that I was solving for. And so that was the benefit of working in both of those. But really in any work, if you have that entrepreneurial desire for yourself, you can kind of use that lens to see what they're doing well, so you can model that, but also to take away whatever lessons you may feel that could be adjusted. You can, use that for your own efforts as well.
Yeah, definitely. Helen, anything to add there? I think everyone else has given.
I think pretty much covered.
Cool, great. All right, sweet. So now I'm going to just turn to some of the questions that appeared in the chat over the last 30-40 minutes. And Anna has graciously helped sort of send me some of the ones that have bubbled to the top. And so the first question is really around, I think, startups, especially technology startups. And I know not all of the startups here are technology, but it's sort of obvious, like coding. Okay, that's like a skill that they need and are hiring for. What other non-coding CS skills are you all looking for at your sort of respective startups? And yeah, like what are some of the other job types that are common at startups that are outside of writing code, for those of the audience who aren't CS majors? Helena, maybe do you want to start here?
Yeah, sure, I can start. So I guess it'll help to see, I'll just kind of walk through what we've hired and kind of the thought process there and the stage we're in. So we were 2 people full-time in March when we launched. We raised a pre-seed round and spent most of the next few months just building. And both myself and my co-founder were technical, so we didn't need to hire a software engineer right away. And the bigger need was, how do we get this product in people's hands. So growth is super important. And our primary users are on campuses. So we brought on actually a few interns that were on these campuses themselves. And we've kind of continued to use that strategy. And when we're thinking about bringing people on, we thought, okay, we need somebody in growth. But then the strategy was working so well that we actually decided to change that and then hire somebody in engineering. And now as we continue to kind of like spec out our hiring goals, it continues to be in engineering. And now we're 4 people full-time, all engineers. And we just brought on somebody part-time as a designer. So that's kind of our thought process in kind of building out our roadmap. And we'll probably hire another engineer before we hire somebody officially in like a growth / go-to-market role. Part of the rationale there, or / in the sales role, like myself and my co-founder should be making the first like million MRR, not MRR, sorry, ARR. And once we can, have our own, once we understand how to sell our product better than anybody else, then can we bring somebody on to actually train them to do that. Before then, it doesn't make a ton of sense because they would essentially be like another co-founder at that point. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but that's how we think about it right now.
Yeah, no, that definitely answers the question. And yeah, we'd love to hear from any of the other panelists, especially Milagros. I know that, your startup isn't even a tech startup. So I'm curious, what are the roles that you're hiring for or have hired for recently? And like, what are the skills that you really need to round out your team?
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's pretty specific. So right now we're in a discovery period. So we're doing a lot of research and listening to our community to best figure out how to cultivate a community moving forward. So it's very, it's an adaptable thing that we're hiring for, someone who's super flexible. And at this point, we're just doing a lot of research. So someone who's really more of in a research role and in a data curation role.
Cool. Ryan or Alcide, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I will say that something that I grossly underestimated was the importance of marketing. And it's amazing. The impact really strong marketing skills can make on your visibility as a company. I would say if there's one thing that I learned in 2020 that I didn't have as strong a command of before, it's definitely the power of marketing. Leadership just in general is always really important. Projects have to be managed, right? And I find projects have to be managed, but problems have to be solved, right? And I would say the most important, sort of, I guess, job skill or attribute that you need to have is problem solving. I'm not here to pat myself on the back, but I can sit in a meeting with our engineers, discuss challenges we're having in, getting over a hump and say, hey, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Right. And sometimes be able to go in a new direction. And the ability also to, take a step back from one part of what the company is doing, whether that's a technical goal or, road mapping, whether that's hunting for, other opportunities or, hunting for other members of the team. That's always stuff that's important. Some of those jobs are part-time, some of them full-time, some of them on a contract basis. Someone mentioned outsourcing in the chat, which I think has been a really important sort of experience that our company has had. My brother is a software engineer. And so while both he and I sort of maintained sort of full-time employment, our vision was that, well, hey, look, we'll just sort of manage an offshore team and it'll be great. We won't have to spend that much money. We'll be able to get all this stuff done and it'll be fantastic. And the really, really difficult technology problem that we wanted to see if we could even solve before deciding if this was going to be something worth pursuing, we were able to, work collaboratively with an offshore team and prove that it could be done. And I mentioned, last March when we won this competition, I'm on top of the world, right? I figure we've got this product that's ready to just jump out into the mainstream. And guess what? Google decides they don't like our product very much. Whatever we did, we could not get into the Play Store. I mean, it was devastating, right? And so we're going back and forth with this offshore team trying to figure out, man, how do we make whatever changes we need to make to this app to get it in there? I'm like, well, hey, there's this Google for Startups program. Let's jump in that. Surely they'll help us get some feedback better than the canned, sort of responses you get when you submit stuff at Google. Not so much. And so we started the process of building our own team, and quickly came to the realization that we needed to burn this thing down to the ground and start over from scratch. It was the best decision that we ever made. And looking back on it, there's a degree of accountability. It's a combination of accountability and sort of the collaborative nature of the process that we weren't getting with the offshore team we were working with. We have since then maybe tried to determine, okay, maybe there's a specific aspect of our roadmap that we can just sort of pick off and give to an offshore team now that we've got our own internal team going, and we don't necessarily want to expand just for the purposes of scaling up to complete this particular task. And what we got back was maybe a decent structure, something that would sort of helped us cut to the chase in terms of getting it done, but we still had to do it ourselves. And so I may be getting a little bit away from the question, from the question a little bit here, but we just experienced some challenges that could only be solved by sort of really sharp problem solving and collaborative work. And so my brother thinks he can teach anyone anything that has some kind of background in coding. And so as long as there's a willingness to learn and solve problems and a belief in what we're doing, we think that those are the threshold requirements.
Yeah, definitely. And Ryan, anything else to add there?
No, all good.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we have time for just one last question. And not everyone needs to answer, but if anyone who feels sort of inspired and wants to leave us with some parting words. So this is another question just around if I am a student and I'm recruiting for a startup, and how do I prove to you that I'm going to be able to do work that I potentially have never been able to do in the past? So how do I sort of demonstrate to you in an interview or in a cold email that I'm someone who's worth your time, I guess is the question. And so maybe if you have an example of someone who impressed you with a cold email or was able to sort of reach out and establish a connection and even get a hiring job, I think that would be just a great anecdote to leave us with maybe.
So I have an anecdote, a very recent one. So we weren't going to hire any spring software engineers at all. Interns, software engineering interns. And we had a college friend who was like, hey, hire me. And, she'd never had a software engineering internship before. And we don't have enough resources to mentor anybody. And culturally, she's a great fit. She's a great eye for front-end design and stuff like that. So, we gave her the challenge as a courtesy, but, we didn't have high hopes. And unfortunately, it came back as a, this doesn't really meet our expectations. This isn't going to work. And we can't just hire you because we're friends from Duke. But she kept pushing. And she was like, okay, what can I do better? I will spend all of December learning React. And she came back and she did it. And she was like, can I have another challenge? And we're like, sure. And then she did it. She spent a whole weekend on it. And it was still not really where we needed it. And we're like, this is great. We're happy to kind of keep mentoring you along the way. And then she came back again. with kind of like, okay, what about this twist on the role? You know, what if I focus more on design? She submitted like an entire new mockups on Figma, like end-to-end flow of stuff. And just like the amount of effort and initiative that went into it, like stood out beyond anything else we'd seen. So even if her skills weren't there, we saw how quickly she was learning. And it was this combination of like tenacity and then clear progress. You know, even if it's something you haven't done before, ask them what they're looking for and say, okay, give me a month and I'll get there. And even if you're not there in a month, just being able to show that like I've learned this much this quickly for you, and then making kind of all your lessons learned very topical is also extremely impactful, right? Because if somebody sends me mock-ups of like, oh, I did this for another startup I was working at over the summer, like, great. But what can you do for me, right? And if you can show me that kind of on a platter, you know, it's really hard to say no to that. So we ended up now extending her an offer as a spring internship for a software engineering intern.
That's amazing. And I think, you know, the other byproduct of her going through that process and that iteration is even if she doesn't ultimately get the offer from you all, she's, you know, more qualified for every other offer. And I think that's something also to keep in mind is that like, you know, startup hiring is not as structured as, you know, going to a big company, but you'll develop skills just by going through the process, by learning. And if you can sort of be proactive and prove to people that, you know, you're worth the time, like, you know, the worst thing that happens is you learn a bunch and get to work on, you know, hopefully a project you're excited about. Well, that was awesome. I know we're a couple minutes over. I'm going to hand back to Anna for some last closing words, but thank you all to the panelists.